want to call the regularly scheduled board meeting for October 25th to order. And do we need introductions? I don't believe so, because we'll introduce our guests when we get there. Changes, additions to the agenda. I have one addition. I sent people an email kind of shortly before this meeting about Vermont School Board Association sent out a new required policy for monitoring requirements of special education and IDEA. And they have that model policy, so I sent the extreme skeletal draft of that policy so people can look at it, and we can go over that items for discussion when we get there.
I have an update on that a little bit.
Okay.
We'll get to it.
Okay, yeah, when we go over the policy.
Yep.
Okay. And that's the only one that I have. Do you have any changes or additions?
No, under my report, I'm going to cover a few employment changes in the office. We had somebody who gave their 2-week notice, and we have a family medical leave. So, but I'll mention that when we get to mine.
Okay.
So I don't think we need a separate agenda item.
Okay, sounds good. Where are we now? Okay, I will take a motion to approve the minutes from September 27th.
So moved.
Okay, so one of you, Elizabeth, you can make that motion. And who called in at the same time? Was that you, Scott?
Looks like it was Scott, yeah?
Yeah, I think so. So Scott will be second. Are there any changes, additions, clarifications necessary for the minutes? And if any hands are raised or, okay. Hearing, seeing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes from September 1st?
Do you have to do a roll call?
Technically.
Yeah, I have to do a roll call. So sorry. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Sorry.
Okay. Anne Marie.
Aye.
Colleen Spence.
Aye.
Davis McGraw.
Aye.
Elizabeth Burrows.
Aye.
Jamie Turner.
Aye.
Mark Youngling.
Aye.
Nancy Pedrick.
Aye.
Nicole Buck.
Aye.
Rebecca Roisman.
Aye.
Scott Richardson.
Aye.
And I, Amy McMillan, vote aye. Thank you, everyone. Next on our agenda, we have public participation on items not related to the agenda and announcements. If anyone has any of those. I do not see any hands raised. Moving on. The superintendent's report, we have a guest, and that is where we're going to start, and that is Mary Gannon. Elizabeth, would you like to introduce Mary Gannon?
Yes. This is Mary Gannon. She's over there and the others. It's hard to see.
The owl will find her.
Yeah, as
We-
soon as you start speaking, that little
Okay,
guy
great.
is going to focus on you.
Mary and I know each other from the Social Equity Caucus of the Vermont Legislature, and where we both work on issues related to social equity. And it took me, I think, probably 6 months before I realized what you do professionally. And then I heard, then I heard all kinds of wonderful things about you from various school board members and other legislators. And so and I think you reached out to me when I had mentioned that we were implementing this antiracism policy. And so we've been talking about how she can help us with things like training our board and helping us prioritize the procedures and steps for implementation. So take it away.
All right.
Also, I should say, I emailed all of you Mary's bio earlier, which she shared with me, and hopefully you got it. But okay, take it away,
Yeah,
Mary.
thank you. And that was a little bit late. I just remembered you and I had spoken about that, which was only last week, but feels like it was weeks ago. So thanks everyone for making some space to welcome me here tonight. And I appreciate the time. And what I was thinking was just on my end, I would speak for a little bit. I, have sort of a kind of a summary and some bulleted points after speaking with Elizabeth last week that I think would be most helpful in sort of crystallizing what it is I could do and how I could be helpful. And then take some time for questions or other comments if people have those or if that's appropriate. So I didn't want to be on the agenda for too long. So I first wanted to say that yes, as Elizabeth was saying, this is a body of work. I think of issues of equity and diversity, I call it a body of work and a body of practice. And I'm pretty intentional about that because I feel like there are a lot of ways that these ideas of equity and diversity are often seen as soft topics, that they're not taken as seriously, or that there isn't a sense that we have to necessarily embed the content or the knowledge into what we're doing in our everyday professional and personal lives. And I also feel like there's often socio-cultural and other forces that are often using the ideas of diversity and equity in ways that are not intended. That are, in some ways, I don't like to use this word, but right now at 6:30, I can't think of something else. But this idea of weaponizing, the way that this work gets weaponized. And what I'd like to say to people is that if we really, drill down to it, and I spent a lot of time today with your anti-racism policy and the procedures, and then also Melissa Crum, who's a colleague of mine. And it's really impressive what lives in these documents. Like there's so much good here and richness and very much sort of positive, ideas and ways to think about how we move the needle forward. So I want to say that at the outset. And I think we are also very particularly, when I know you are, as school board members, that we are at a particular moment where we have a lot of misinformation, I would call it, and I would also say mischaracterization and just a lot of concerns about what it is that's happening in public education across the board. So what I want to do tonight is share a little bit with you about what I think is really powerful about school boards taking up this work, why I feel like it's essential when we look at also the ways that school districts and school leadership, and then how it trickles down into faculty and into staff and into special educators and the cafeteria workers and students. I think this work really shapes and impacts everyone's experience in schools and in school districts. One of the exciting things in my field or in my work right now is I feel like in the state of Vermont, there's been a lot of energy in the last several years around school boards really taking up this conversation. There's been lots of efforts in schools in Vermont for several decades to think about ways of integrating curriculum or looking at recruitment and retention of diverse candidates for these positions in school districts. So there's been sort of pockets of that. But what I do feel like is happening in the state is that there's this real concerted effort to create a network across school districts. I've been very fortunate to work with the Hartford School Board, and I'm also working with the superintendent and their new equity coordinator. I've worked in Burlington, I have worked in Brattleboro, Waterbury. So I've been able to sort of build a picture of what it means when collectively in a state like ours, this work is happening in school districts and where people can exchange resources and really cross-fertilize with each other, which I think is really powerful. And I definitely feel that this district, given what you already have, as I said earlier, with these really powerful proclamations and then this list of procedures, and then also looking at Melissa's, I didn't read all of the full summary, but I will. And also that you brought Jameson in as well, who's also a dear colleague of mine, that you're positioned really well to think about what the next step is. You know, oftentimes what happens is I will enter a district and there's none of this in place. So we're really starting at this bottom, you know, at the bottom of the barrel. And I think it's exciting that there's some really powerful opportunities here. So one of the things that I like to start with when I do work with boards is, and I feel like our own education is really essential, is to have a collective conversation with a board, with board members, about what your core values are in your work collectively as school board members, and also just individually. Like what brings you to this work as a school board member? And to begin to see how your core values of what you care about and what brings you to doing this work that's laborious and not paid, to begin to see how it's really aligned with the ideas of equity and diversity, that there's a real alignment with these ideas of how do we create learning environments and school communities where everyone who is engaged in those places can be welcomed. And that's not just with students. I really feel that way with staff. I feel that way with faculty, school leadership, that everyone feels like they can bring their full selves to a school district. So we spend a little bit of time, so if I were to paint a picture for you of a particular session, I like to talk about is to give you all some time to talk about the core values of your work, and then begin to see where it's aligned with these pieces that you have already outlined. And then begin to dive into yourselves a little bit and think about, how do I understand these issues of equity and diversity? And how do I define this language? Like, what does it really mean? Are we only talking about racism? Are we only talking about gender identity? You know, is diversity the same as equity? So we spent some time really building some clarity around that. And again, I offer this template, but oftentimes there is some of these conversations that have already happened amongst the boards. I don't know that's the case here, but we could certainly, adapt this as depending on where you're at in your own conversation. And one of the reasons why I think board education and sort of doing some of the self-exploration, if you will, or these conversations, is how it really models for the rest of the district that you are also engaged in this work. And one of the things I have found when I have worked in districts, which is not so much the case, but years ago, it was really hard to get to school boards. Like there was oftentimes like a principal would call or a special educator would call and say that they needed help. But it was hard to get a school board to understand why they should be involved in this conversation. So I feel like it's really important in terms of like how it gets embedded into the fabric of a district. But I also think it's really powerful when school leaders and teachers, parents, like all your stakeholders, see that you're also having the same conversation and that you are also committed to understanding how you are situated in this conversation. So I think there's great value in that, which is why I think it's also essential. The other piece of the work really is to take this work that you've already crafted and begin to see what, where it can be implemented. And I know that, through your work with Jameson and Melissa, that you really laid a lot of the groundwork for this. And, as what I would want to do is as I look through, for example, the anti-racism procedures, what I see are some low-hanging fruit, like things that you could really get at sooner, and then other things that might take more time that you'd have to build on. One of the things I always say, and Elizabeth, we know this because we listen to it on SEC and we know it just from our work, is that engaging in equity, diversity, conversations and work in a school district and in a community is really a marathon. It's not a foot race. It takes a lot of time. It takes energy. You're asking people, particularly in homogenous communities, and it's not a situation where I feel like people need to feel badly about this or feel some shame around it, but what most of us who are in homogenous communities have never really had to think about this or don't have to think about it in our daily experience, right? So it takes some time to really build what I describe as like our own literacy, our own language, on around how we talk about these issues and how we think about how to implement this work into the school district. So I see this as sort of like a long-term, sort of ongoing process with you all, where you're laying all these different aspects of equity and diversity, particularly from your policy and your procedures, which are so, again, really specifically articulated onto all aspects of the education, all aspects of the district. And I feel like particularly the policy really gets at that, because you're not only just sort of talking about like governance or hiring, you're really also talking about curriculum, you're talking about school climate. So I found that to be incredibly comprehensive. Let's see. So again, I think if I were to just kind of get to logistics, oftentimes what I say to school boards is I think 2 sessions is helpful, because that first session can really be about you as a collective board, getting a sense of how are you speaking with each other about this? Where are you as colleagues around your comfort level, your understanding of the language, your understanding of these 2 documents, and also Melissa's recommendations, and to kind of build that platform with each other. And then the second session is really getting more like, what does it mean for us in the positions that we're in to begin to roll these different procedures and the policy out that have been described here. I want to say there's not one formula for this, which I think is probably obvious to all of you, but there's lots of ways that school districts do this. There's lots of ways that the work can work in subcommittee, can be delegated. There isn't, one template for that. I think there's a lot of design by the district, design by the needs. But again, I really want to say to you all, given my experience with a lot of organizations, districts, state police, if you look at my bio, I've worked in a lot of different contexts. You have a lot to work with here, which I think is pretty exciting. And so the questions become, as we do as the board education begins to take foot, where you feel like you're able to, as I said earlier, like get to this low-hanging fruit, and then what are the other things that you would need to bring to like David, you would bring to your admin team, to the leadership, and begin to think how that's getting rolled up. And I also want to say, I don't want to make assumptions here. Some of that may already be happening in the district with individual teachers. I don't know the district well enough yet, but. So I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions further, or if there's more you'd like me to say at this point.
Does anyone have any questions for Mary?
Just quickly, I want to add just a couple things. One is one of the pieces of this policy that I was really impressed with, which makes me think that in some ways we can move through some of this work together. If I were to do this with you more quickly, is you have a whole piece in here about definitions and language, which is remarkable. And also, I'm really impressed with the language that you brought into that list. And the other thing that I would say is, I'll come back to it.
Yeah. And one of the things that I want to just say to the board members who are on board, we've got sort of a 3-pronged approach to this. And Elizabeth and I explained this to Mary, right? One prong is to go through Melissa's recommendations and try to come up with some action steps. The second prong was really to try to draft an eventual job description for for a DEI or somebody who might coordinate or organize this work. But then the third piece, which I think is where I'm hearing Mary might start, was the board piece, was clarity on the board, development of the board, getting clear on the definitions, the belief statements, and all of those things that align from a board level. Because we haven't really, as a board, other than as we worked through the policy, we haven't really talked at length about what are the ramifications and implications of having a policy like this, and then having you help also shape the administrative agenda to some degree once we put all of that together. So I mean, I'd love to see Mary have some time with the board, whether we use board meetings or some concentrated time. I think that could be helpful. The only other question I had for Mary was just in working with boards like this. I mean, typically, I heard you say 2 sessions, but obviously it could be more than that. But could it be incorporated into a board meeting and just have an hour of development time, or would you like more of an extended period of time?
Yeah. So I know that there's public meeting law around this as well.
Right.
So,
Once they get together, it's a warned meeting.
It's a warned meeting. So what I did, I'm thinking of another district I was just in. I think somehow they were able to, maybe it was Waterbury, where it was warned, but somehow they said it was board professional development,
Right.
which kept the public a bit.
Right.
So my preference is, I mean, I understand and I understand you have a lot of other, things on your plate as well. My preference is to start with a bit of a longer session where we could, really begin to, I think, kind of parse some of this out. You get to have some conversations with each other, and to really even maybe begin the conversation about where in terms of these procedures or the priorities, what are those? And you could begin that conversation. And then I'm happy to think about, we'll do this in all kinds of different ways, right? Like I could come for an hour and you could do other board business. It's a lot to ask people to come out on another evening or Saturday morning. So I'm very aware of that. I think the bulk of the work is really on that upfront. And then you can see ways that you all might decide how you want to roll some of that out and do it a different way. So that's, one thought. I have done Saturday mornings, which I know it's hard. So I don't think there's any good time for people who work 10 hours a day and then have to come somewhere at night or have families. I understand that. But I'm pretty flexible around that. I do think that there are ways to work around public meeting law, though. Yeah.
Okay. We have one person with her hand raised, Rebecca.
Thanks for being here, Mary. I think David did ask the question that I wanted to ask, because I did want to say that some of us have been engaged in this conversation through the Antiracism Committee, but it has not been the entire board. And it would be great for the entire board to all be using similar language when we're talking to our community and just being clear with them. So yeah, I think the idea is great. And my question was similar to David's, and that is, would it be a special time for sort of like professional development for board members, or would it, how would that be folded into the time situation?
We could possibly have it similar to a retreat.
Right.
And a poll could go out with several days and times. We could find out when Mary's available, and then send those days and times out to everyone, and whoever is able to, with the most able to attend, that is what we would go with. And we would, depending on how early or how late and on what day, we would certainly have some snacks so we could have refreshment and sustenance. because that always helps
Yeah,
with the
for
work.
sure. Yes, it does. Yeah.
Nikki,
Your mic might be off.
hey,
Hi, okay, here I am. I think we need to make sure that we include all the board members of all the individual districts as well, because the policy is at the SU level, but all of the board members are going to be responsible for how it gets implemented. So I think
yeah, I think all of the districts, individual districts need to be on the same page and using the same language and definitions, et cetera. So,
So yeah, we would do the
Absolutely.
doodle poll with everybody.
And when you say we're talking about like Heartland, Weathersfield,
And
all
Yeah.
Windsor and Westminster.
Windsor, okay, great.
Or Mount Scott.
Mine's good, yeah. I have one quick question that I think Rebecca raised. I did see something in here about the community anti-racism committee, but you referenced something, Rebecca, about a racism, anti-racism committee. Is that in the district?
That's the task force.
Yeah, it's not a committee.
Oh.
Right, it's a task, yeah.
It's a task force that's made up of some board members, some community members, a lot of staff and administrators,
Oh, right,
teachers.
And that's embedded within this district that has representation from all these other.
All the schools.
Yes.
All the schools,
and
okay.
that's the group that mostly met
Met with
with
Melissa.
That met
Melissa.
with Melissa, okay,
Yeah.
wonderful, great.
Scott, do you have a question?
Did you just call my name, Amy?
I did.
Okay, thank you. Mary, thank you for being here. And I heard the word governance during what you were saying. And could you just expand on that? It might have, I might not have picked up exactly what the point you were making.
Sure. Well, there's lots of ways. I think we reference governance in boards and on board work. So I think of all the boards that I'm on, we talk a lot about governance being sort of process, how decisions get made, how policies often get crafted, and then who's responsible for holding the organization of, in this case, the school district, accountable around the policies, which I think is an interesting piece that is laid out here somewhere about accountability. And then I was also referencing that, Scott, in terms of, which is more, I guess, human resources. I was thinking about, what are the ways that as a district is putting efforts out to try and diversify in all different kinds of ways, its staff and faculty. What are the processes that a human resources department is using to make sure that those job descriptions are getting to places that would not typically be outside, that are outside of school spring, for example. So that's different than governance, but yeah, governance more around policies, procedure, and accountability.
Okay. Well, it got my mind swirling, honestly. And I have found it to be quite a conundrum to be a school board member and to simultaneously be concerned with governance change. And it's something that this SU has been through with some change, but perhaps not a lot of change. And in my experience doing this work, board members are largely, uphold the laws of the land where they are, and that being a champion for change is kind of almost, it's real. I'm not sure it even goes with being a board member, frankly. So it's been a personal challenge of mine. I would just share. I'm not sure that it's even possible to be a board member and to fight for governance that truly provides an opportunity for equity in Vermont education. I'm talking specifically of school choice, which obviously and without question serves the most privileged members of the community across the state of Vermont. There's no doubt about it. And, to be a board member and find a problem with that is really a conundrum. So is there anything you would add to what I'm saying?
Well, I feel your pain, I guess, to start with. And I hear this a lot, from school boards who are, again, also, what your charge is really around, fiscal health and also, the budgets, of course, but also making so that policies that are part of the district's, governance are being enacted, and then feeling like you may not have a lot of say in some of the larger kind of state decisions that get made. So I feel like around the work of equity, it is interesting. A lot of times boards will say to me, they're not really sure what we're supposed to be doing with this. And it's different than what a teacher is doing, right? Or a principal who is committed to equity or trying to bring forward embedding an equity framework. What I have found powerful, particularly in this given moment that we're in, where I feel like a lot of educators and I think school leaders are particularly feeling, incredibly overwhelmed and often wondering if, who has my back? Who's really there to support me? And so I think that if a board can wrestle with these ideas, even though it's not always a perfect process, it's really hard work. And then it might push on people's individual ideology or individual feeling about who I am as a human being in the world, for example, or some other kind of personal opinion. But the reality is that what we're really talking about, and the way that I like to frame it, is that at the center of the conversation is always the students and how we think about the learning community that we're trying to create. And what we want to create is learning communities where kids can bring their full selves. And are they able to come into a school and get a full picture of a curriculum that also meets them where they are in a range of different identities or developmental stages? And so you don't necessarily have to be worried about the day-to-day curriculum, but are you supporting a district that is taking this forward as one of their priorities? And I think that can be a really powerful statement when a board does that. And yes, I would agree with you, Scott. Change is hard, and these things definitely take time. There's no doubt about it. But again, I think given what you all have already worked on and produced, there's a lot of good foundation here.
If I might just add on to what Scott was saying, that if you consider governance and the question of choice and how that has to do with equity, and you bring up the topic of equity in any of the towns in Vermont, I would say everyone is, oh, absolutely, we need equity. And then you bring up the idea of choice, and this wall comes shooting down and says, well, not if it has anything to do with my losing choice.
Exactly.
And so that's a very touchy topic and conversation, but it is one that I feel absolutely has to happen in our state.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, in many ways, if we just were to talk about privilege and just work from that is, I think, really the hard conversation. Then.
Right.
So people will say, oh, yes, absolutely, but then not in my backyard.
Yeah.
So
it's more to when you were talking about our low-hanging fruit that we can't start with choice, because that
Yeah.
just shuts all of the work down.
Yeah.
So we have to start
Mhm.
where we are and look at how we're supporting a curriculum that
Yes.
promotes what
Yes.
our values are.
Yes. Good.
Thank you, Scott. It's a hard conversation. Are there any other comments or questions?
So it sounds like the place to start would be to get some availability from Mary and just kind of talk about your parameters and
Sure.
even just some of the logistics or the specifics around contracting and how you like to work that out.
Yes.
So maybe you and I can reach out to each other
Okay.
and figure that out. Then we'll do a doodle poll, see what people think about extended time versus a shorter period of time, send out a bunch of dates and see what works for everybody to do this board work. And we'll include the other board members as well. So it sounds like it's a plan for now.
Nikki?
I would even argue when we include the other board members, when we're looking like at, I think everyone should have equal weight. Like, I don't want to just weight the SU board members as like, if they can come to the meeting. Like, I think everybody that we invite needs to have equal weight, because I think that it's just maybe even more important to get the members of the individual boards that are not part of the SU board. Because within this group, we've had a lot of anti-racism discussions, not as much as the task force, but more so than the individual boards. So.
Great, thank you, Nikki. Okay. Is there more?
Yeah,
I think that's it. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Unless there's
Let's
other
start.
questions or.
Well, appreciate you coming in person.
Sure, of course. Happy to do it. As I said, I think, I mean, what's exciting, and I think, Elizabeth, you would agree that, you know, what we see when we're on those calls every week is that there is this collective energy and also kind of collective commitment across the state. And so you're in good company, and I think your neighbors, Windsor, is it WCSU? Is it Windsor?
WSCSU.
Yes.
Or WCSU, yeah.
Yes, so I also had done some work over there, and you know, it just feels like there's like a wave that's happening, and I think there's a lot of good support and ways of sharing resources, particularly among superintendents. So.
But I'm not sure that everybody is aware of everybody else.
I know.
think it's really
Yes.
unfortunate. I mean,
Yes.
where was it? I was on some call the other day that had,
That was Lavelle Brown. Was that with Lavelle Brown?
yeah, where they were referencing, one of the participants was referencing, their policy that they were implementing, and they'd be glad to share it. And it's the same, it was also done by Jameson and
Right.
Ariel. So
Yeah.
Very similar.
some people,
Yeah,
they're working all over the state, but
there's no like clearinghouse of
Yeah.
sorts, or sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be helpful.
Okay. Well, I thought there was at some point a superintendent's gathering.
Yeah,
folks.
so,
They meet,
November
they meet
4th.
monthly, and the superintendents.
yeah,
Okay,
the Vermont School Board Association and superintendents are having their conference on the 4th and 5th.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be discussion
Oh,
of
good. Yeah, that's November.
a lot of that. Yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
and Lavelle Brown is the.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's great. Good,
So
good.
that'll be good.
yeah. So this
Mhm.
conversation
Slow but sure.
Yeah,
has been happening.
yes.
Oh my gosh, the Vermont School Board Association and Superintendents Association met, oh my gosh, 4 years ago maybe,
Mhm.
and we've created the equity definition. I mean, this
Yeah.
has,
Yeah.
we've been working for a long time on this. It's
Yeah.
just as other social events have happened in society, it's gained
Yes.
momentum as well as getting sidetracked.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's interesting because right now, to be totally transparent, I'm contracted with the Vermont Superintendent's Association in the VPA. And one of the things that we're talking about is what does this actually look like when you see, because teachers say that a lot. Teachers want to say, like, what does this look like? How do I know when this is actually happening, right?
Yeah.
And so we're trying to set forward like some benchmarks around what that could really look like. And it's interesting how that shows up in data or not.
Right.
So, anyway, nice to meet you. I'll see you again. David, just so you know, if I don't, this is the next few days.
I'll email you, pretty
Okay.
busy next, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just send out that particular email. So.
Okay, good. Yeah, because it's.
I'm gonna walk her to the elevator and go to the
Select board meeting, yeah.
I'll be right back.
okay.
Gosh, it'll be tonight.
Great,
Yeah.
well, thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Probably get started on
Yeah.
budget, maybe in about 15 minutes,
Okay.
maybe a little
Great.
less.
Yeah. So, David,
Are we good?
moving on with your superintendent's report.
Right, so, I'll go over just some general topics, and then, we'll save the SU budget for the end of my report. And then that goes right into items for discussion, I guess, so it may all kind of blend here, we'll see. First of all, I wanted to pull up for everyone the financials for the SU. Ed sent me two attachments that kind of give us a sense of where we are. I'm going to share my screen with everyone, and we'll get that going here. Hold on just a sec. I'll make that a little bigger for everyone. So this is the central office budget, quarterly, first quarter to date. And I'll just leave it up there on your screen. You should be able to see it essentially. As always, Ed tends to encumber everything to budget. And then he did so in the SU. And this includes curriculum, technology, and the superintendent's office. So that would be the business office and superintendent's office. So essentially, when all is said and done, and I'll send out a copy of this to everyone when we're done here, it shows that we have a surplus of 100. If you go down to the bottom, that highlighted part, we have a surplus right now, early on, in the first quarter of 116,686. And that, of course, if we could end up with a surplus, impacts our assessments essentially. But even more dramatic, I think, is the special education assessment. And again, if you look at this, that's the biggest part of our SU assessment is special education. And if you look at this, you'll see that Ed basically encumbered the revenues to budget. But as we get down, we're really looking at a variety of other services, and I think where you see, where you're going to see some interesting differences, and not surprisingly, but we haven't been able to hire to 100% of our staff. I mean, Katie is continually looking for staff members. So, that continues to be a little bit of an issue, but also I think the way we've organized things like speech pathology and psych services, a lot of those right now, and I don't know that they'll stay under budget, but they're very much under budget now. So if you, and in all fairness to Katie, Ed just got this to me over the weekend, so that's why I just didn't even get it to Katie yet, but that's showing quite a surplus in special education. I don't think that'll stay the same. I think it's got to be vetted, but right now in special education, we're showing $826,654 to the good, and that's on the surplus side. So between the central office, business office, and tech services and special education, we're upwards to $1 million surplus. And part of it is because we've been able to put some things, into ESSER, but also because, as I said, being able to hire doesn't always, has been a challenge. Did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. Oh, wait, you can, don't need to unmute. Sorry,
No,
poorly
you're
trained.
talking to
I'm
the owl.
talking to the owl now. We are just receiving some of the bills that for tuition and out of district kids. We just got them a couple weeks ago or a week ago. So that will have an impact. I just want to, but staffing, yes, we're pretty steady or lacking, but that seems to be really late this year. Getting some of those, what it's costing us for kids elsewhere. So we know what to expect, we just haven't seen the actual numbers yet.
Yeah.
To encumber the POs.
That's good. And Katie, I see in psych services, do you think he's combined a few things there? Because that's where we're really over, is at that
That is,
604,000. Is that just a different model? that you
yes,
use?
so all of the BIs, SEIs, BCBAs, school psych, all got lumped into psych services. What we've done for next year is put it under teachers, under support staff, under 5171, but it had to do with how the function codes and putting everything in the right spot. So I think it'll make sense when we look at the budget, but no, we don't have $600,000 worth of psychologists running around. It would be, but I asked the same thing, I'm like, who was in that line? And
Right.
yeah, so it had to be anybody who was not, its function codes were driving who had to be in that line.
Yeah.
Not
So I think
we think of.
what Katie and I, let me get out of here and stop presenting. What Katie and I decided, because we also, I think it was Mark who asked the question about the summer services, and I know we did a brief overview of how the summer academy went. We looked at enrollments, but I think in our November meeting, Katie has agreed to do a more detailed report on where we sit with special education this year. But I think it's so that's the plan. So hang on tight. That was just something that was given to me in a preliminary form, and I thought we all ought to look at that. And I'll send that out to everybody so you'll have it. And then November, when Katie comes back and does a little more detailed financial report on special education and including summer academy, we'll have that. I did want to say that we have basically the same COVID restrictions, and we're still quarantining. The state let up a little bit on having to quarantine kids who are close contacts outside, and on school buses, it's only kids who share the same seat. So that's given us some, and I don't want to jinx us, but we've done pretty well with quarantining in the last couple of weeks. But the bottom line is it's something that's always on our mind and we're always thinking about it. I am working with the Vermont Department of Health because, as you know, both the booster shots for those who have had the Moderna, the Pfizer, or the J&J are available. And so there's a November date, a December date, and I think a January date for booster shots here locally. And I've been putting that in my email blast. And we're also trying to work with the Vermont Department of Health, the Springfield office with Heather Rigney to set up clinics for children between the ages of 5 and 11, just to make it a little more proximate, a little more convenient for parents to be able to access a shot for students at that age. Of course, parental permission only. It wouldn't be forced on anybody, but it would bring the shot, the vaccine to the child rather than having to take the child to the vaccine. Amy?
A question on the restrictions and testing and such. And I can't remember if you brought this up before, but during one of the recent, it might even have been our, the VSBA regional meeting, the Secretary of Education mentioned the test to stay.
Right.
So that kids aren't being sent home to quarantine,
Right.
but instead can do the test. Are we anywhere?
Yeah,
I can't remember the status of that.
No, it's available. There was quite a bit of paperwork the AOE had to do that because you're actually becoming, in some ways, a state-run local lab because you have to, you actually do the lab work right at the school. So yes, we are involved in that. I put out a few blurbs on Test to Stay in my email blasts that go out every week, but essentially we will be participating in that. The nurses are working hard with myself and all the rest of the administrative team and the Vermont Department of Health to make that happen. And also Lori Brown has been instrumental. So yes, I'd say within the next, I'd like to say within the next couple of weeks, I don't want to be too aggressive here, that we'll be able to do that. And that's so that all students who have been in close contact with a positive case would be able to do what's called a rapid test on days 1, 3, 5, and 7 under the jurisdiction of our nurses. And then those results would be processed immediately. And if they are found to be positive, they'd have to go for the PCR test. And if they were found negative, then they can stay in class. So that's what we want to do, is we want to keep kids in class. That's the essential key to this. So I really appreciate the work all the nurses have done on that as well. I'll just get through these, and then if there are questions, we can talk about it. Negotiations, we're still in mediation with the teachers, and we are setting up a date in early December to try to finish that process. I think we've made some headway on both sides and some clarification. Bill and Scott and Jamie have been, not Jamie, but Jackie, thank you. Too many J's here. Jackie are on that team, and we'd like to bring some good news back to folks in December that we've settled. And we will be starting with the support staff too. They reached out to us. We've since reached out to them. We have, basically our proposals ready for that crew too. So it's a lot of work, but we've got it done. Those who want to go to the Vermont School Boards Association conference, I know some of you have been contacting Lori. Lori can help you get registered. I don't know, Amy, if you wanted to say any more, but you heard it's going to be all around equity and anti-racism. Louvel Brown, who's an excellent, he's working with some of us in this district this year. He's going to be the keynote speaker, but did you want to say anything about that, Amy?
Well, the sad part is that we hoped for in-person at Lake Maury.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Okay,
So I have to wait longer to get back to Lake Maury.
So that must have been a recent decision?
Yes, yeah, that happened
Like,
just
yeah.
almost 2 days after Elizabeth had asked me if it was really going to be at Lake
In-person.
Maury, because it was, and then suddenly it wasn't.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's
That's too bad, yeah.
Because the state clerks and treasurers had a meeting. There were probably 200 people at Lake Maury. Granted, it was only one day, but as far as I know, there was no super spreading of anything.
Yeah.
I mean, they had things pretty well under control. But I also understand
Yeah,
the need to
absolutely.
be safe. And we've had some incredible positive numbers lately. Kind of scary. So I get it. I just have to wait
So if you
to
want,
go to Lake Maury.
no, Lake Maury is a great
But
place.
it is, the timing
Is the same?
is, no, you'll have to go online to Vermont VSBA to see the schedule, but it's a lot more user friendly for those of us who work and or have other meetings perhaps scheduled during the day.
Yeah.
So it will be an easier time of it. And the meeting, the VSBA annual meeting.
Is that
also
gonna be
gonna
virtual too?
Yes, it's all virtual. And we did that last year, and going over resolutions and voting on resolutions. I think it was probably the smoothest that has ever happened in my entire time of going to VSBA meetings. So I think
Okay.
it'll be good.
So if you haven't reached out, now that you know it's gonna be virtual, if that makes it easier for you, just reach out to Lori. Lori will get you registered, and and I'm sure those renewed times, like Amy said, are on the dashboard at the VSBA, so that'll be good.
Yeah, and I highly recommend that people attend, and just to hear what is happening across the state, because being on the school board is more than just your community. We are serving all the kids across the entire state of Vermont. So I hope everyone can go.
I'm gonna be a panelist.
All right?
Yeah, our very own Elizabeth is gonna be a panelist for one of the workshops, so yeah, it's always a great time, so talk to Lori. I did wanna say last but not least, before I turn it over to Angie's gonna give us a quick ESSER update, especially for ESSER 2. But I did want to, and then Larry's gonna walk us through the budget, but I did want to say that we're under a little bit of stress here in the office because we have 2 people that have requested family medical leave for personal issues that are going to keep them out of the office for an extended period of time. In one case, it's more intermittent where they're in and out. The other case, they're going to be out for a fair amount of time. And so that Gail, who takes care of our payables, and Kylie, who is our purchasing agent, Kylie Tack, and then Hayden Goins, who's done such a great job for us. She's our payroll clerk, payroll coordinator. She is moving to Maine, so she gave her 2-week notice last week. So right now we're luckily there's a lot of cross training in this office where people can cover for each other, so they can keep it going, and they will keep it going. But in the case of payroll, we had to decide what we were going to do, and we definitely see payroll as part of an HR function. We talked with Tina Canfield, who's our HR coordinator, and she is going to cover in the short run for Hayden, but she understands payroll. A lot of what Hayden does comes through Tina anyway in HR. So what we thought about is, rather than hiring another, what could in the end be a more expensive payroll coordinator, we're thinking about just getting an administrative assistant who can work with Tina and probably could do some of the data entry, some of the other pieces that Tina is doing, and then it would be, we just saw it as an opportunity to be more efficient in that office. And so you may see an advertisement out there that crosses, that says administrative assistant. That's not a new hire. That's replacing Hayden, who has given her notice to go to the great state of Maine. So I think that's it. I'm going to ask Angie to just give a quick update on ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, I guess, because we've had at least one form. So do you want to talk for a minute about that?
Sure. I have been working on the ESSER 2 budget. I have to have submitted by the end of the week a fully budgeted ESSER 2 application, and so we didn't quite spend everything. So I've been, I figured I'd kill 2 birds with 1 stone and get as many of the amendments that I could in there. We have had some savings due to positions that we were unable to fill, so moving some funds around so that we can fund more mental health supports, as well as more equity and inclusion work. So I will give a full budget overview in November. So if we make sure that, I'd love to do that. Also looking at ESSER 1. I'm hoping that I can get ESSER 1 fully spent, and then we will be able to free up some funds from ESSER 2 by putting some things in ESSER 1. Again, realizing some savings there for positions that, as the summer academy numbers came in, we had some adjustments there. You always try to over budget a little bit, then under budget. You don't want to be caught under budgeted. So those things I am working on. ARP ESSER 3, Brittany and I had the first forum at Heartland. We are asking our staff to watch the recording of the Heartland forum. Of course, they're always invited to the Weathersfield and Manascutney School District forums that are in November on the 8th and the 9th. And the ARP ESSER 3 plan that we have to submit asks us to have a few things. It has more compliance kinds of things that we have to do, which includes, like, for example, there's a checklist we have to do that shows different things we've done with our reopening plan. Reopening, because do keep in mind that many schools across the country were not back in person. Unlike Vermont, most of the schools in Vermont were in person at least for part of the week. So those are the kinds of things that I'm working on. And of course, I think in the strategic and recovery planning section,
Right.
Brittany's going to talk a little bit more. Brittany, did you have some data that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I was just going to give a brief update and then share some of the attendance data that the board had asked for at the last meeting, whenever you're all ready.
Yeah, and we could either do that now, or I see it under items for discussion for strategic/recovery plan. We said we would monthly talk about the recovery plan, so
Okay.
which would you prefer?
Take a look here.
And the budget discussion is under items for discussion.
It's in the chat too, so
Yeah. Let's see. How about, yeah, I guess we could do it now and then we could just move into budget and
Yeah, that's
spend more
right.
time
Yeah.
on that. Okay.
Yeah, do you want to talk about it now, Brittany, and what you've been
Sure.
working on?
I do have a presentation if I can share my screen quickly. That's okay?
I take mine down. I think I did, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Let's see here. All right, so I did make this pretty quick, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those. So last meeting, the board asked for some attendance data. So what I did is I ran the percent of average absent per day just in September over the last couple years. So you can see kind of where the trends are there. Most schools have increased significantly this year, whereas last year they did decrease. You know, I'm sure there's a variety of reasons for that. But I thought that was kind of interesting. This is the percent average annual daily absent by academic year. So it's actually a little bit all over the map and didn't follow the trend quite as much as the last slide I showed you. So I thought that was also interesting. Some of the schools certainly increased this year versus decreased last year. Whereas you can see HES actually had a higher percentage last year than this year. So, you know, we're still, 2 years ago than this year. You know, and I'll run the exact same data this year and we'll kind of see where we fare at the end of the year. Any questions about those two slides?
And we can send you this PowerPoint too, so you can see it and spend a little more time with it.
All right. So quick update, as you know from last time, I kind of organized them based on goal area. We are currently finishing up some of our assessments. TMP just closed. Exact Path closes on October 30th. F&P closed I think it was Friday, actually. So we're just working on kind of gathering that data and organizing it a little bit. So I'm hoping that possibly at our next meeting, I'll have a little bit more data around those testing areas. And then the MTSS team meets again this coming Thursday, actually, and we're going to be talking about kind of separating the team out a little bit into a coordinators team that's really going to work on the systems development and training staff, and a data team that's going to work on, taking all of the data that we have and then working with teachers on how we're going to be effectively using that moving forward. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I think the team that we have composed is actually really excited. So hopeful for that. I thought I heard a hand. Anne Marie?
Yes, I was asking, do the absenteeism numbers include quarantine students? Because I was just wondering if that was a factor in Wethersfield being so high this time.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Unfortunately, within the system, you can't easily run that data specifically for quarantine students. So it definitely includes that. I have no doubt that that's a large component of why those numbers are high. And it's hard because since we didn't have an easy way to track it within the Power School system where I ran the data, you can't compare last year to this year around quarantine. So I can't say this many students quarantined versus this many not. I'm sure individual schools might have that data separately outside of Power School, but I have no doubt that was a major impact there.
Thank you.
I have a question. What is F and P?
That's Fontes and Pinnell. It's a reading assessment. So the teachers work individually with each student. The students read to them, and they have a scoring system that they use. And then this year was the first year that we actually required all teachers input that into a data spreadsheet so that we can upload it into our system called Performance Matters, where we're hoping to get all of our data collated so that we can easily manipulate that information and pick up on trends.
Okay, thank you.
Alrighty. So Panorama is a social emotional learning assessment. We are going to be getting that out shortly. We had some glitches getting it set up, but we are working through that, and we are hopeful that we'll get some baseline data, and then we'll take it again later on this school year. So we hope to get it out sometime in early November. So I should have the data ready by December, but that's all kind of pending. And then our Leader in Me Lighthouse teams have been meeting, and we actually, the admin team, as well as the Lighthouse coordinators, met with Barbara from Leader in Me today, and teams from several different other schools to work through some resources that they have available to us so that we can keep moving forward with that. And then the last thing is from our strategic plan, information and communication. The curriculum instruction and recovery team, which is myself, Angie, and Patty, we have been putting out a newsletter. I'm happy to share a few copies of that with you all so you can see some of the resources that we're giving out to our staff. And then, as you all know, we have our upcoming forums. Heartlands was the other day on the 19th. We did not have a great turnout, but we are hopeful for the upcoming meetings at the other school districts, and we'll be posting those on our website and with a feedback form so that hopefully people will watch the video if they were not able to attend and be able to still provide us feedback.
Just a question or a request. If the Mount Escutney School District information could be sent so it's in Tom Marsh's newsletter,
Yeah.
that would be really,
Yeah.
really helpful.
Also, just my quick comment is that Davis McGraw was able to secure the town public meeting space.
The Welcome Center?
The Welcome, no, not the Welcome Center, but Davis, take it away.
Yeah, so
We have the municipal space in the municipal building they use for select boards reserved. They have a big screen set up in there, and their own Beanie Owl type system. Windsor on Air is going to help get it recorded. So that's great. We'll have an in-person spot for community to attend as well.
Cool.
Great.
So is that the select board room or?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
So is someone able to maybe email me that information? Because I know I did not know that, and I want to be sure that it gets onto the advertisement that I sent out to the principals.
Exactly.
And the Tom Marsh.
And the Tom Marsh, but yes, it needs to get out to be on the flyer for it. Yes, we'll send it to you.
Is there anything that I need to do to further schedule that also? I mean, I know the OWL is going to have its own link, so you can see, I mean, I know it's super small. I believe that actually is the forum ad for Mount Escutney School District. And so it specifically has on there the link for the Google Meet that I created. So I want to be sure that I get the OWL Meet out there as well. So I'll need all of that information.
But maybe Brittany, the best thing to do is maybe Brittany and Davis, if you coordinate, then we'll just make sure that everybody gets the right information, and especially.
Yeah, let me get you looped in with Paula down at Windsor on Air too. She tends to do a lot of the coordination around these things, and the technology coordination. So if the three of us get in a conversation, we can get this figured out.
Fantastic. And that's coming up on the 8th. So definitely we should try to get that figured out this week.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
But but the sooner the better.
Let's see. Let me go. Hold on. Sorry. Rebecca, you have your hand raised, and then Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Brittany, I wanted to ask, will you be able to put all the results of these evaluation tools that you are using, which is great, once you do have all of the data in, and will you be able to get that, will we be able to see those results?
Yeah, actually, so as the information has been coming in, I've been updating the data dashboard, which I believe David sent out to you the last board meeting. So if you scroll through the tabs, there should be one for FMP. Well, I say that, but that one's not quite done yet, but I'm getting there. But the TMP should be updated in there because that assessment has completed. And as they come through, I'm trying to update them. Each individual school has their own data dashboard as well. The principals have those and can certainly share those out with their boards. The only caveat to that is that SBAC still has not been released to the public yet. So we still only have the TMP, FNP. I'll get Panorama in there once that's completed. So it should be a pretty complete assessment dashboard once as things get completed with the schools.
Okay, thank you. And the second question was regarding the agenda for the forum. Mm-hmm. I don't remember if we came up with an agenda. Is there one? And for Mount Escutney School District?
Yeah, all of the forums are follow the same format, and they basically go through the 3 different recovery plan goals. And we review each of the individual strategies as well as the funding sources for all of those strategies. And then after I kind of get through those, Angie gives an update on ESSER 3, kind of describes what that is. Actually, all of the ESSERs, ESSER 1, 2, and 3. And then we'll go into providing feedback. I don't know if Christine was at the last one and Angie as well, if they want to add into any of those.
When I'm done talking about the funding sources, then we open up the floor for comments and questions about what's working, what could be tweaked, what could be changed, what could be left out. We want to engage in that kind of dialogue to hear from the community.
Did you have a good turnout for Heartland?
We had 3 people at the Heartland Community Forum. 2 were board members. 1 was a parent. who had some questions.
Thank you.
We'll keep
Scott.
fighting the good fight.
Scott?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say how much I appreciated the newsletter, Brittany. I think it was Angie sent that in an email to board members. I'm not sure exactly how I got it, but that's what I think. And it's good, full of great information, links, time frames, pictures, and is it available? I would just think if it's, I didn't find it on the curriculum website. That's what I would encourage you guys to make it available there, if or else I just didn't know where to look. But
I think I haven't posted it up there, but that's that I think we intended to do that and it totally fell off my radar. Yes, I have been sending it to board members.
Thank you.
We'll send you that
Thank
other.
you.
We'll send you that other data link too that Rebecca mentioned, so that you'll have that, because that'll get refreshed and updated, and that link will always take you back to the refreshed page.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's it for me, unless there are other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. And thank you, Angie.
You're welcome.
So now we can go to items for action, I guess. Oh, that's one of them.
We can start with budget discussion.
Probably the budget. Just quickly, Larry is going to present the SU budget. This is a very important budget for all of us because the numbers that Larry's going to talk about tonight are the ones that get translated into your assessment of figures for your local budgets. So everybody has a central office assessment, what we call the general fund. And then the food service budget is a separate fund, but we included it all because it's an estimate of what each district might have to subsidize the food program. So I'll turn it over to Larry. Just also again thanking Jamie and Colleen and Rebecca for the time that they spent. We probably met 4 or 5 times and put a fair number of hours into this, but I'll let Larry kind of walk us through it.
Okay. So I've shared it out to the Google Meet, and here is what David just mentioned, the budget committee. The SU board picked 3 representatives from each of the 3 school districts to be on the budget committee. David was there, and Katie and myself. Obviously not on here was the department heads who we worked with, because a lot of them make up the SU budget, including Angie Ledoux, and in the business office, Ed Connors was very helpful with giving me everything I needed for this. And we started out talking about what is the SU. The SU is us, it's not a them. And basically why we have it is, an efficiency by labor and resources. So the labor piece is pretty simple. It's rather than Wethersfield having their own curriculum director and Heartland having their own curriculum director and so on and so forth, we have one curriculum director and you pay for each portion of that. Including the curriculum department. Same thing with technology. And instead of having 3 superintendents, you have 1. So the labor one is more obvious. I think the resources is less obvious. And I was reminded in the first meeting, Colleen asked Spence, who was on the committee, David mentioned, asked to go back when we put capital equipment at the SU office under technology. What happened since then? And I had to actually go back and look because we, COVID kind of took our eye off the ball as far as doing trend lines over time of capital equipment. So in 2018-19, when each school was buying their own tech capital equipment under their own budgets, and the SU had a smaller one, we spent $194,000 and change dollars, almost $200,000. As you can see, every year since then, you don't want to make promises for fiscal year 24 or 25. It's gone down. Some of that is the price of equipment has gone down, but some of that, can't account for all of it. Some of that is just efficiencies. Instead of buying 4 projector bulbs, we buy 2 because we keep them all stored locally in one place. So when we need one, we go get it. And you're having more eyes on supplies and equipment, et cetera. So, and this right here is the proposed number in the budget, 121,500. So that includes all the things like Chromebooks, networking infrastructure. Weathersfield doesn't have to buy a switch if Windsor has a switch, stuff like that. And those are more expensive than computers. So that's just, another example of the SU efficiency by labor and resources. That's a resource piece. As David mentioned, there are 4 parts of the SU budget: the early childhood program, administration and operations, sometimes called the central office, but we called it a lot in the budget committee meetings, administration and operations, because some of those people don't work in the central office. 4 of the techs do not work and myself, technically right now, don't work in the central office. So we use that name for it instead. Special education obviously is the biggest piece of the SU budget. And then food services, whatever's not covered by revenue, is assessed out as part of the SU budget. And then we wanted to give an idea of how much of your local budget is local and how much of it's the SU. And you can see this is one example. This is using fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23 assessments. So it's not a perfect mix, but it's really close. And if you approve the assessments, if you approve the SU budget as you roll out your local budget, it's not, this pie chart will look a little differently, but it's not going to look that much different. This is Mount Scottney. And as you can see, 12.5% of their entire budget is special education. Under 10% is admin operations. 2.5% is early childhood, food services. So 74% of every dollar is spent locally for Windsor and West Windsor. As you look at the other school districts, you're going to see, now we're going to go to Heartland next. It's about the same. It's 1% higher locally. 1% for food services, and so on and so forth. So everything else went down for the SU for Heartland. So Heartland pays the least amount of their local budget at the SU. That's a product of their size relative to the other districts. And same thing for Weathersfield. Weathersfield pays the most of their dollars go to the local budget. If you remember back to the Mount Scottney one, it was 74%, so 74 cents of every dollar goes locally. In Weathersfield, it's almost 78 cents of every dollar goes locally. And then so on and so forth. So that's just giving you an idea of how much of your local budget is the SU. That's all that was for. Moving into fiscal year 23, we had to make some assumptions because when you're budgeting, 9 months out, obviously some of it is guesswork and some of it is, trying to budget correctly. So there's no point in if it's something we can do, we budget for it. So for example, Angie, and she can speak to it if there's any questions about it, we are hiring an ELL teacher this year. And so next year, we have to budget for a 0.6 ELL teacher. We, for some years, ELL stands for English Language Learner, right? For some years, we don't have ELL students. If we don't have ELL students, we don't need an ELL teacher. But when we do have ELL students, we do need an ELL teacher. We budgeted 10% increase in health insurance. That's the number that Ed and myself are most comfortable with. Wage increases through negotiation, just like how you negotiate wages. For example, in special ed, where most of the labor costs are, we have to pick a number. That committee that David talked about with Jackie and Bill Yates and David, they haven't settled yet. But when they do settle, we have to have a number for that. So that's what the wage increases are for. ADM assessment for food services, you're going to notice that, and I'll get more into the details on that, but that was an assumption we made for next year. So we currently budget the assessments by ADM, equalized pupil. Equalized pupil is all the students, whether they go to tuition high schools or Windsor High School. ADM is the actual students in the building. And we changed the assessment formula for food services to ADM as a matter of equity and fairness, in the sense that Craig Locarno, who's our food service director, is not planning a menu for Hartford High School, and he's not feeding Springfield High School students. That would obviously affect some of the assessments. There is also, in our goal to keep flat staffing at the administration operations level, other than the ELL teacher, we have no DEI coordinator in the budget, and we have no program coordinator for food services in the budget. That's an assumption. So looking at administration operations, sometimes, like I said, called central office, we're looking at, I'm going to compare the 3 years going back to fiscal year 21. Curriculum, you notice it's 0.5, but you know you have a full-time curriculum director because half of Angie is paid out of title monies. So if you look, fiscal year 21, fiscal year 22, and fiscal year 23, curriculum went from 0.5 to 1.1. That difference is 0.6. That's the ELL difference. If you go down to the bottom, 12 and a half, 3 and a half, 13 and a half, I'll get to that in a second. The difference between 13 and a half and 14.1 is 0.6. That's the ELL teacher. IT services. We have 5 people in IT. We have 5 people the following year, which is this current year. And then fiscal year 23, we budgeted 4. Did we get rid of an IT person? No. We moved myself as part of the September 1st reorganization down here to operations. So you had 0, 0, 1. Office of Superintendent, it's obviously David and Lori. That's 2, 2, and 2. That's standard. Business office went from 5 to 6. That was during COVID. We budgeted for Kylie Taft, who David mentioned earlier, purchasing agent. Now it went from 4. Why did it go from 6 to 4? But the number is the same. It's because we moved HR. We broke HR in the business office, again, part of that reorg in September 1st. And then because Hayden gave her notice when she did, we also moved payroll down under HR. And that's that vacancy we currently are trying to fill. That's not a new position. That's just a change. So you can see personnel services in HR went from 0, 0 to 2. Operations, myself, 0, 0 to 1. So if you can see 12 and a half, 13 and a half, that was a purchasing agent. And then the difference between this year and next year is that 0.6 ELL teacher. That's the only staffing change. We also want to make sure we tied as much as we can to the strategic plan going by our 3 goals. Now, one thing that's different is I think you should keep hearkening back to is that original pie chart you saw. 74 to 78 cents, depending on the district, of every dollar is spent at the local level. That's where most of the action is when it comes to money. Most of the ESSER funds are being spent for local teachers. So just keep that in mind. Now, a lot of the leadership obviously comes out of the SU, but the money is a lot of it's in that local budget. But there are things we do at the SU. There's a lot of stuff we do at the SU for support the strategic plan. In fact, most of us are the ones charged with it. So Leader in Me is curriculum department. It's basically curriculum department and the ad team, but I had to pick SU. The comprehensive assessment plan, the middle school model that David is driving, the ELL teacher we just added. This is goal 1, student success and engagement, project-based learning curriculum, and the centralization of curriculum materials and software. That is in the detailed budget that the budget committee has met more than 4 times over. They've had access to since last September. Also, since we're using Google Sheets, every change we made in the budget, the detailed budget, the general fund budget, was updated at a moment's notice. So the board members on that budget committee all along for the last month or so saw the updates. The next one is culture and student wellness. That's a goal 2. Again, where students aren't paying for food or breakfast, and lunch or breakfast, they haven't since COVID hit. Diversity and equity work, that David is the one leading that work. That's out of the SU. The health and wellness team, school nurse is stipended. That's a local school nurse, but that's SU money that is stipend. In trauma-informed schools, again, I think that's the work with Dave Melnick, the Champions Group. Goal 3, information and communication. David has been sending out his weekly updates. Website and social media, IT services, which is part of the SU, does that. You just saw the presentation that Brittany gave. She is currently not local money, so she's not in the fiscal year 23 budget. She's being expensed out of ESSER for this year. But in fiscal year 24, I believe, goal 3, the data leader is supposed to be locally funded. Upcoming forums, again, Brittany and Angie just spoke to that. Digital registrations was included in the budget. We've cut it out the last 4 or 5 years. Every year we cut it. Digital registration just simply means, you know, those paper packets you get every school year, and then if somebody's phone number changed, you got to write out the new phone number, or they change address, or the guardian change or whatever, and then it would go back, and then they'd have to update in Power School. That would all be done digitally. Also, for Lori Brown, for new enrollees, it would all be done digitally. They would just scan their birth certificate and everything's right there in that file, and then it goes into a holding tank, we call it. And then Lori Brown would push that person through to Power School without having to shuffle papers. The last part out of goal 3 is David was tasked by June of 2023 to tap an information and communications leader as part of the 9-1 reorg. That is myself. So I'm tasked with deliverables within inside goal 3 that are future out years that I'm going to be responsible for. Special education, Katie will speak to this.
Similar to last year, we're following along with natural attrition with paraprofessionals to increase professional level staff, and that's going to go along with as Act 173, which is focused on multi-tiered systems of supports. That's the MTSS piece. Looking at interventions done by professional level staff, and that's heading into next year. We're not exactly sure how Act 173 is going to impact everything, but we're getting ready for that. We have seen more time for special educators to be within the classroom to provide direct instruction, which then alleviates the need later for paraprofessional and more support. So we're really emphasizing that at the younger grades. And a couple of buildings, Weathersfield in particular, we decreased their caseload size so we could increase the amount of time special educators are providing direct services within the classroom for students. We had to include the 10% increase in health insurance and the wage increases, and that actually overall was probably one of the biggest increases in the special ed budget. We didn't we added back in a position, and I actually just realized I didn't put that up there. My former position as assistant sped director was out all last year. We didn't have it in. We put it back in this year as a coordinator position, primarily working with Mount Scottney and the Mount Scottney district, as well as our out-of-district folks, because we had one of our out-of-district case managers leave. So it ended up being kind of a wash for this year. And it's in the budget for next year. Building capacity, again, with Act 173 in mind, building UDL, Universal Design for Learning, and our capacity in our MTSS system. Embedded folks in this in our classrooms, which is helping with in-house programs. So one of the things that's different in our budget, we had a decrease in transportation costs. That was a big decrease, I think a little under 200,000 if I remember correctly. And also a decrease in what we're spending for students in out-of-district placements. And both are related, because if we don't have a lot of kids out, we aren't transporting them. But the emphasis is on as much as we can, even if we're creating in-house programs that are not as inclusive as some of our inclusive programs, their students not being sent out of the community. And so we have created a life skills program at the middle school and high school over at the Windsor School, for example, that has students now from all 3 districts. And we're also doing the busing with them with TK and trying to be as efficient as humanly possible with our transportation. Larry and I have worked a lot on that. So we're also working with, which is part of a little bit of our ESSER funds, with the regional special ed directors and superintendents on looking at other ways to build in some collaborative practices and maybe some more collaborative programs. So we are part of that conversation. Early childhood's pretty exciting. We just met last week, and within our current budget this year, both for early, and I'm starting with the bottom, ECP is the early childhood program, and ECSE is the early childhood special ed folks. We, within our existing budget, opened 2 pre-K classrooms at the Windsor School with 1 full-time special ed teacher teaching one of them, and then Jennifer Sprague is the early childhood teacher teaching the other. So we could work on increasing the number of students, and we also increased the hours. Next year, our goal is to have at least one of those classrooms as a full day. We're going to use some of our ARP Idea B money, which is different than our ESSER money, because it all has to be spent for SPED. Our early childhood money for that, we want to spend on We have to fix the sprinkler systems and something else in order to have nap time to kids stay. But that's part of our big goal is including extending the day and increasing our attendance and capacity to meet the local need for early childhood. Both, we can't be 8 to 5, but we could be 8 to 2, 8 to 3, as long as it's a school day. Yeah. So we did that without increasing the budget or staffing. So because we're doing it together. So that ended up being something people are pretty excited about. What it will exactly look like, we do plan on surveying families and getting some more information on what models we should go for. But so that's early childhood.
Increasing capacity is excellent because we all know that there's just a major need for early childhood
Those young
education.
ages,
And locally, we're having, for early childhood specifically, and we all know about our shortage, they're experiencing a really big shortage. One of our major partners for in early childhood was closed for a while and now is only open 2 days a week. And so we're trying to support them and as well as families and doing as much as we can creatively for students who need services as well as just children who need daycare as well, or probably pre-K. So I think regionally we'll see some more opportunities for partnerships with our partner programs too. I think that was it for my slides, right?
Yep. All right, so now we're moving on to the big drum roll for the big fat number at the end of the general fund before the assessments.
It's not so bad.
10,789,415. When you put it up in bold, it looks bigger. That represents a 5% total increase. Almost 3/5 of which is special ed and 2/5 of which roughly is admin and operations. Now to put some context behind that number, because it is such a big number, I went back and looked at the difference. The dollar amount increase from fiscal year 19 to 20, and then so on and so forth till we get to the next budget year. So right here, you can see that the dollar amount increase was 1.4 million in 1 year, almost $1 million right here, 900,000, and then $1 million last year's increase. This year's was $500,000. That represents the dollar amount increase. So again, to provide more context, we threw it into percentages so you could really see what the percentage rate of increase would be. And you can see that the rate of increase a few years ago was 20%, and then double-digit increases year after year. And then this year, a lot of it due to the work of Katie, it was the rate of increase is down, cut more than half. So that's where the SU general fund budget is. That 10,709,000. That number is that's the 5% increase we spoke about. How does that mean for your local assessments? So, all right, this chart right here. So if you look at fiscal year 21, equalized pupil, all right, equalized pupil percentage. That's the percentage of all kids. So when you hear equalized pupil, think all students, whether they are tuition out or not. And this is what we're doing this year. Forget about these columns right here for now. Now here, you can see Heartland went from 32 to practically 33%. So what that means for Heartland is, regardless, if the budget was flat, what would happen to Heartland's assessment? It would go up, right? Because they're paying a higher proportion of the assessment. All right. Now, Mount Scottney, it went down a little bit, not much. And Weathersfield going down about 0.5%. So that makes up for the difference, that the 1% roughly that Heartland is gaining. So again, assuming a flat budget, no increase whatsoever, that's what the assessment would bring for those schools. Now ADM, these last two over here, we spoke about that earlier. That's the food services. So if you combine the students in the building, the actual students in the building, and we always use the previous year for equalized pupil and for ADM. Heartland is at 267, 600, and 214. That's obviously combining Albert Bridge and Windsor together. Now you can see the difference in the ADM percentages. So relative to last year, Mount Scottney is going to pay more for food, and Heartland less. Everybody follow? Than they would if we used equalized pupil again, which makes sense because we're not charging Heartland and Weathersfield students that are not there. Now the assessments for Heartland, now these are the dollar assessments. You can see early childhood is up, and administration operations, we spoke about that earlier, is up. Special education is up a little bit, and these are the assessments. Now you're going to see a total at the end. So right now, this is what David shared out last Wednesday to the board. These are the same tables. Mount Scottney, if you look at the programs, and then the difference. Why, you can see Mount Scottney paying more for food than last year because of the ADM switch. Food service did not go up by 30%. We know that because the total budget was up 5%. Weathersfield, same, not much change, and then again, a lot of the credit go to Katie and Hernan in the special ed department. Now, if you look at the total assessments by district, so you throw everything into a pile, and what does this represent for a change? So that 5% SU fund, general fund change comes out to a 4.5% increase for Heartland, roughly a 3.5% for Mount Scottney, and Weathersfield, again, relative because of their size relative to the other districts, is actually paying less in assessments if you approve this budget for fiscal year 23. So I want to thank the budget committee, Katie, Angie, and Ed Connors at the business office for all the work they've done. If anybody has any questions, or if David wants to take it from there.
I just have a couple of comments. I appreciate that you were able to tie the budget discussion to Portrait of a Graduate to show where we're spending our money, that it's towards what our goals and values are, as well as, not only the boards, but the community, because of all the input that we have. And this was just a very informative presentation, so thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent job.
Thanks.
That was what we were hoping. This is what we were hoping for.
Yeah.
Yes.
The budget committee asked, and then we've heard you the last few meetings talk about linking the strategic plan and trying to stay as, I don't want to say lack of numbers heavy, but because he has no way to do it without presenting the numbers, but as much as we can do it with nomenclature and less numbers.
Right, and this will make it easier going forward when each district goes to put our community presentation together to present and support the SU budget, to show where it is that we're working together and how the SU provides for the districts. I think that's very good. And there are 2 comments in the chat. Anne Marie says, excellent presentation, thank you. And Nancy Pedrick is much easier to understand. And let me see, Rebecca has her hand raised.
I have a question regarding the ELL teacher. This may be, Angie may be able to respond to this one. Do you keep an ELL teacher on staff, or do you only hire one if needed? And does it?
So let me give you a little perspective, Rebecca. I've been in the curriculum position for 4 years. This is start of my 5th year. I've never had an ELL student until this year. And when the first year I started, I found a box of paperwork of some ELL reports that probably predated my predecessor, who had been here 3 years prior. He may have dealt with it his first year. So we have not had English language learners in our district. Now we do. We have identified students that need the support of an ELL teacher. And because we are required by law to provide that, it was impossible for us to predict that we would need that during budget season last year. So I'm hoping a 0.6 is adequate. We might find that it's not. We'll see.
You just said students, does that mean more than one student?
Oh, yes.
So,
Yes, we have, I don't,
Not by
do you have
school,
the
but you
number?
can give it.
4 students.
are they?
And we have more
Is
coming
it-
up through pre-K. we
Are
can
they
tell
in
you
more than
that.
one school?
Awesome.
And
Oh,
they're spread
yes,
across a
and
couple of schools.
4 students in 3 of our schools.
And I believe, just for some history on ELL teachers, when I started on the school board, so we also had superintendents at each of our schools. But I think there were probably ELL teachers at each of the schools, even though, and probably working full-time, even though there wasn't necessarily
Always in the other.
always a
ELL
need of
population.
that. And as I know at least some of the students in the Windsor community, as they gained proficiency in English speaking, there was no longer the need, and there was a significant amount of, what's a good term? There were some strong feelings when that program, when
Yeah,
it was
started.
demonstrated to no longer be needed.
Mhm.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Does an ELL program does an ELL teacher work with the families as well?
Yes, I've learned more about ELL in the last 2 weeks than I ever knew.
Yeah.
One of the things we have to assure is that if the family requires translation, there are districts in Vermont that have, 50 languages spoken. And what they have to do is make sure that any text-based information that's sent home is translated. So we're trying to determine the level of translation that's needed for our families.
So is a 0.6 going to be enough?
Right now, we are working with a consultant. She is a ELL teacher in Northern Vermont, and she thinks that 0.6 is adequate for our students' needs. And what's interesting about ELL is it's not an exact science. It varies each student, you can have 2 students that look like they would require a similar approach, but because of the family situation, because of how long they've been in the United States, how long, there's all these factors that really make each child's situation unique. So it's fascinating. And the way that they approach English language learning is not, it's an advantage if our ELL consultant is fluent Spanish, so she can speak with one of our families. There are other languages that are very difficult to even find in the state of Vermont.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating. So it's fascinating. I'm learning a lot.
So the 0.6 might not be one person.
It could, right, we've
It
talked
depends
about
if we
that.
can pull it together, if we can find people.
If not, it might split between some consultant work and depends on what they were available. They're not really awfully available, so.
No, there aren't.
We've been lucky, we've got a great consultant and so.
She just can't come down here and deliver services.
No, she's too far away.
So,
How cool.
That's very cool.
it is very cool.
And those 4 kids represent 3 different countries.
Three,
That's great.
yes.
Yeah, they represent 3 different countries, which is
Excellent.
great, yeah.
And
No,
I
it brings a
would
little
think-
diversity to our system,
Yeah.
which is nice.
Yeah, and I would think there would also be a difference in the needs, because every student has a different need as far as how they learn.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
I know for any English-speaking person who is learning another language, we learn differently. We have different needs, so.
But also, we have so much better technology now too.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
that's gonna be
I just saw
That is very
something
exciting.
today about Google, there's a new translation app that just,
Translates
been
for them,
developed.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I received, while I was giving the talk, I received emails from, so I just want to let them know that Christine and Wendy, I'll share the presentation. And obviously, David shared the budget details with everybody. The committee's had it for more than a month, the line by line. David shared it with all of you Wednesday, the assessment numbers, and then Friday, the budget detail. So the presentation, which you just saw, I will share out.
It can go on the website.
I'll put it on the website under finance and operations.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think I think the board's got a choice tonight, really. I mean, I think the work was excellent, and this was one of the most committed budget committees too. I mean, I don't want to embarrass Colleen and Rebecca and Jamie, but they gave up a fair amount of time to really spend with Larry and I, and asked great questions. There have been some changes based on their questions. So I think, the sooner we can approve an SU budget, the sooner we can lock in that assessment number. It's always an estimate for your local budget. So you're welcome to vote on it tonight. If you want to wait till November and vote on it, that's fine. I think, I certainly think it's been scrutinized enough to have a vote, but you're the board. And I also think the other thing the board should decide is the DEI right now, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Coordinator or Director or whatever you want to title that position, there's some ESSA monies budgeted for that. So I don't think we have to work.
there's some ESSER monies budgeted for a consultant.
Right.
So it's not a full position,
No.
but it's
Yeah.
consultant.
But in three,
Yes.
didn't we in three say we could move it up?
I'll
to-
look right now, I'm
Yeah.
not sure we did.
I think in three, we said we might be able to move that, but more importantly, because we did have this discussion, a little while ago as an SU board, and that is, whether or not the time has come to look at program coordination for the food service program too. We had given you a job description, we had talked about that. We have a culinary coordinator. Do we want a program coordinator that would work with kids and families and setting up special events and dealing with the wellness part of our food service program? Some people got really excited about that. So again, we would probably add another $70,000 to $75,000 to the budget if we wanted to do that. And that would be divided three ways, just like we saw today with the equalized.
No, ADM.
That would be divided by the ADM, right? Because that's tied to the lunch program. That's exactly right. Thanks, Larry. Rebecca?
So I'm not clear on that position, because I know we talked about having a health educator, and so I wondered if that position would be different than a health educator for the entire supervisory group, or would that be in addition to a health educator?
I think the way we envisioned it and the way the job description was written, that it would do sort of a little of both, right? It would lie primarily on the food service side with just whether it's community dinners or fresh fruits and vegetable grant management, but then it would also be going into classrooms, working with kids around health and wellness and nutrition and those pieces. So it was sort of the beginning of a health educator in all of our buildings. So it really, but I really think that should be a board decision. If somebody wanted to, to direct us to look at that and bring that back, we could,
And that's what it would do to your assessments.
Yeah,
Again,
we did actually, I don't know if you can see that, but.
so if you approve the food service program coordinator, as David described, it would change the assessments by that amount. Again, to refresh your memory, this is what it was. 93, 101, 4,100 in the black. So 93, 101, 4,000 give back to 115, 149, 12, 12.9. So the assessments would go up to 5.5%, 5% even, and a little less than 1% for Weathersfield.
And really, once we decide to vote on this, the only thing you would need to vote on is to vote on that bottom line budget number. That would have been the 10 million change that that Larry had up there, but if we added another 75,000, that would go up by that amount. I don't know if you changed that amount, Larry, or not, but yeah.
If you wanted to make a motion, I could look it up. So you get the right number. It's up to you. I have the number.
Scott?
Yeah, hi, Amy, thank you. First of all, I'd like some more time to think about the budget. I don't want to vote on it tonight. That's my personal feeling. Second of all, the idea or the concept of not paying for the food because meals aren't served to kids that go to outside high schools, not paying for the food the same way, has now evolved into, I think I just heard Larry say that the directors of these programs are also in that ADM format, both Craig and perhaps a new position. I don't agree with that. I think that's a leap from what we were talking about months ago. That was purely the mechanics of ordering meat and potatoes. And so I don't know how it got there, but it was the equalized pupil assessments that was a big deal for our supervisory union to arrive at that point and work together. And I want to protect that and make sure that we don't get too far from it.
So Scott, just to make sure I understand, so the food service coordinator you feel should be done by equalized pupil, but not necessarily the cost of the food program itself? Do you agree with ADM for that, or?
Well, I think the whole board was throwing around the idea of counting actual students for the actual cost of the meals. I think that someone like the director or the coordinator, perhaps, you're talking about salary and benefits and results that are perhaps unmeasurable, right? So these are district-wide approaches when you have these positions, and I don't think you could. It wouldn't be right to argue that it had something to do with how many students were eating meals each day. So yeah,
Okay.
that's great.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other thoughts on what Scott was saying?
Sorry. Scott, can you repeat the last sentence that you said? You said something each day, and I couldn't quite hear what you said.
Sorry, Elizabeth. Students eating meals each day.
Okay, thank you.
Wendy?
Hi there, thanks. I would just say, as a community member for Mount Ascutney, I agree with the same idea that Scott's presenting, in the sense that I think it's fair and reasonable to use the ADM to calculate the cost of food. And obviously that's attributed to the exact number of people who are able to be fed. But as far as the resources of Craig and the other staff, maybe this other position, I think that the equalized pupil is a more fair way, because obviously they're working just as hard across all the districts. Quite frankly, some of the other districts are taking more resources maybe in some ways because they're utilizing the program more. So I think an equalized pupil calculation in those cases is more appropriate to the way it really works.
Thank you, Wendy. Would it be possible to have that broken down, Larry?
Which way? It would be very hard to, it would be very hard to change saying the labor of the food services program is equalized pupil.
Right.
And the food itself is ADM. I think that's one thing that this is what the budget committee came up with, but if the board wanted to change it from ADM to equalized pupil, I think that's one route you could go. I think it should be one or the other.
Well, I think we're
and as far as a program coordinator position, if it's going to be in the classroom, right, or mostly in the classroom, I think you could make an argument about, but then I think you should pull it out of food services and put it somewhere else. If it's going to have an instructional component, that's a big instructional component and not simply once a month or something. If it was going to be a person that was in the classroom a fair amount.
Well, what you could do is you could do what we talked about originally, and that is put 0.5 of that position, say in Angie's budget, and put 0.5 of that position in Craig's budget, because there would be some food service specific. I do agree with Larry, though. I think it would be very hard to pull the labor out of food service and charge labor one way and charge food the other way, because it's all one fund, and we have to be able to demonstrate to the state that it's all coming into that one fund, it's all going out of that one fund. So I think what the board would have to do is decide whether they want equalized pupil or whether they want ADM. I don't think you could, I think it would be too messy from an audit standpoint and from a state reporting standpoint to have it both ways. I think we'd have to make that decision.
I think we need to see that comparison, David.
Yeah, we could certainly look at that comparison. At one point, we even had it, but we could certainly bring that back next week and see. I mean, I don't know whether it could be done quickly now. Maybe we don't have to worry about it now. We could do that.
Depends how much longer you guys talk.
Yeah, if everybody's in
in
agreement that we're gonna move the final decision, which I have no problem with that at all, to next month. I think the bulk of the work has been done. You know, it might give a chance for that committee, sorry, Rebecca and Colleen and Jamie, but to get together maybe one more time to look at the differences between equalized pupil and ADM from a food service perspective and what impact it has on the assessments. I think Larry's trying to scramble now to take a look at that. And it's not going to affect the bottom line.
It won't affect the bottom line. It'll just affect the assessments.
It'll just affect the assessments.
And you approve the bottom line.
Yeah, and I understand, I can argue both sides of it. I know what Scott's saying, and I also know that the board members who have brought up in the past the fact that you can argue with all of our other programs, including special education, even the central office, because the central office does a lot of work with our high school students in other high schools. We have to do all the residency requirements. We are the LEA for all of those special education students, because just because a student goes to Hartford or goes to Woodstock or goes to Springfield, we're still servicing them. Matter of fact, we spend a fair amount of time on those kids in a bunch of different ways, you know, trying to verify residency, trying to follow with performance scores, serving their special ed needs. But to Larry's point tonight, and he's not advocating one way or the other, those kids who choose to go to Woodstock, choose to go to Springfield, choose to go to Hartford, we're not feeding them in any way. We did very, very briefly last year when we delivered those lunches during the absolute height of the COVID pandemic. But other than that, we don't. And Craig doesn't think about them, doesn't have to worry about them. And you know, especially for Heartland, that's a fair number of kids. You know, of your 300 plus high school kids, you've probably only got about 30 at at Windsor. And I always feel bad about that number, but it is the truth. And I don't think Nikki's on either tonight. And I know she was one of the ones that was advocating pretty heavily for ADM versus equalized. So it might be better to just take it up. I think we're ready to vote. I just think we need to solve this one last. And so the two things I need to know.
So David, I'm sharing it with their screen right now.
Okay, good.
So give me one
The
second.
two things we need to know is, we'll consider a program coordinator and we can bring it back that way. And then we need to know the ADM versus equalized pupil. Those are the two big ones.
And
So this is what it would do to your assessments. It would,
Can you go up to that a little
Yeah.
bit?
so 120, so Heartland would be up 123, 5.9%. And Mount Scotney would be up 63,000. So Mount Scotney's would go down, Heartland's would go up, and Weathersfield would go up roughly 8,000. They were getting 4,000, or they were paying 4,000 less. Now they're paying 4,000 more. So if you compare that to this number right here, in 1 second. There we go. So at 93, 101, 4,000 less. 93, 101, 4,000 less. 123, 63, 4,000 more. That would be the difference if you decided to go to equalized pupil for food.
Elizabeth has her.
But just one moment.
Yeah.
I am not sure that we are ready to vote on this now, since it was only presented. And we do need some time to kind of sit with the numbers. And Elizabeth.
I want to know why the DEI coordinator has been left off of this budget.
Well, it's been left off this budget because we have, at least right now, we have budgeted in ESSER funds about $80,000 for DEI coordinator. So it doesn't have to come out of local revenues in FY.
This is the local general fund.
Yeah, in FY23. So we didn't put it.
But is $80,000 enough? Because we committed to not just hiring one person. We committed to hiring a whole, as per everybody we've talked to, it should be a whole department and not just one person having everything done.
I don't think I know we've talked about that. I don't think we've decided that though. Really, that's another conversation you could have. I've always thought that you have to have a department, a job description, or you have to have a coordinator and a job description, and then you kind of build the department from there. I hadn't heard that we were gonna, hire any more than one, but.
Okay, well, we'll
We
take
can-
it up with Melissa and she'll
Absolutely,
set you straight,
yeah,
but,
because we're a small, we're not
Yes, we
Chicago,
are.
and we're not
Yes,
New
we
York
are.
City.
yeah.
We're,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So I think that we just need to think that through, but I hear you.
But as such, I almost think, well, I don't know if $80,000 is
Enough.
enough. 80,000, and that's from ESSER funds?
Yeah. That's what's in ESSER right now for FY23.
And it's
And that's-
a tentative budget because we should not technically budget it until we've had the community forums and get that.
And also,
that
yeah.
feedback.
But also, because when you said that about, when you mentioned it, the reason that it flew right by me was that, my understanding was that that's the total amount of money that could be spent on that in next year.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, there may be some, like Angie said, and we're gonna look at this more next month, which is probably why it's good that we move this too. We may have a little bit of carryover from 2, right, because we didn't spend anything on the DEI in 2, or in 1. So we, there may be a little bit more money in there to talk about.
Okay, so in other words, if we wanted to have, we have talked about having different kinds of high quality training come in. If we wanted to use some of the funds for that, would we be digging into that person's, imaginary person's salary?
I mean,
In other words, it's at the sum
right, I know
total
what you
of
mean, yeah. In other words, we have 80,000 to spend on diversity and
everything,
equity.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think depending on the carryover, right, I mean, that's what's in there for 23.
I'm not really comfortable making any, like because we have a tentative budget there and it's not, it's big. It's over what we have in there. We just kind of looked at what we have this year and thought about what it would take to keep this year for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
And so there are other things added in. So I don't really feel comfortable saying that I
Yeah.
have a
So
budget.
Yeah, so I think to Elizabeth, I don't know if everybody can hear me, but to Elizabeth's point, I mean, that's another thing to consider. That's why we pointed it out in the presentation. If we wanted to put a little bit more in this SU budget for diversity and equity, then
Well, yeah, so
that's not in ESSA, we could do that.
I ran the numbers, so here's what it would look like. This is an idea, and the budget committee has seen this.
Are you sharing your screen, Larry? 'Cause I don't
It's not sharing this.
Oh, I
chat.
got it, here we go. All right, so now you see it. So if you, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you approved ADM for only food services. Then this is what the assessments would do if you had a food service program coordinator. So if you remember 93, 101, and then 4,000 back, now it'd be 115, 149, 13. If you hired only the equity coordinator, 119, 136, 13. Why is Mount Scottney's so much more than the food person? It's because that's ADM. It's equalized pupil. So we have to use those assessments. Now, if you hired them both, this is what it would do. 141, 184, and 30,000. 6.5% up for Heartland, a little more than 6.5, 6.75. 6.25 up for Mount Scottney, and Weathersfield up 2%. That's if you kept the assessments the same, ADM. If you decided to equalize people, it would change.
Okay, so this is for both.
Yeah.
And this is with the food
Program
program
coordinator
coordinator
and the DEI.
No, I'm sorry, with the food program coordinator and food service, ADM,
You got it.
and the DEI,
Under equalized people.
equalized people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And one of the things we might do, again, I'm want to be sensitive to everybody's time, but we have had, this committee's worked hard, and I think that we could bring this back to the committee, including the equalized pupil versus ADM. I mean, we've been equalized pupil for probably, because I remember when we had that discussion. It was a lengthy discussion, and it was a very trying discussion. Scott is right. And we came to a decision, and we've been doing it now for probably 5 or 6 years. We've been using equalized pupil. Just last year, a couple of board members, and rightfully so, mentioned that maybe ADM is for the food service, because now we're all involved in a fairly expensive food service program, that we would do that. So maybe we could just go back to small committee with those two issues, right? What do we want to include? And then you could speak to your board representative. So Mount Scottney board would email or talk with Rebecca. The Heartland board would send their thoughts to Colleen, and the Weathersfield board would send their thoughts to Jamie. We've got time, because our next SU board meeting is not until November 22nd, which is a Monday night, and it's the week of Thanksgiving, but that's the 4th Monday of the month.
Right.
So we've got some time to talk about this. But I do think that by November, we have got to have a firm number for the budget. And the truth is, how we allocate the assessments could come up after you vote on the expenditure of, you can have your bottom line and then debate equalized pupil versus ADM, but we will have to have a bottom line by next November. So I think by this coming November. So I think that's where you have to have the conversation about the DEI, you know, and Elizabeth's concerns, which are understood around whether there's enough in there or not. I do think we're going to commit some of ESSER to a DEI because it's in our strategic plan. It's part of our portrait of a graduate. It's sprinkled in all throughout. So I mean, that's why I know we put some money in ESSER 2 and 3. Well, actually 1, 2, and 3. But not so much with the program coordinator. That was a relatively new idea that was sparked by talking to some of the other districts around, and also some very local talent that we have that gave us some expertise on writing a job description. So if everybody's okay, we could send this back to committee and debate those issues. What do people think?
The question is, does anyone have any comments on sending it to committee? Personally, I feel that that is a good, good step, good next step.
I do.
I would, this is Colleen, I'd be interested in hearing what people feel about it too, if you want to send me a note.
About
Yeah.
those issues, Colleen, you mean?
Yes. Adding, not adding. ADM versus equalized pupil.
What we'll do is we'll push off the committee meeting until maybe not this Friday, but next Friday. So that'll give people a couple of weeks to get your thoughts and ideas, either in email form or to Colleen, Rebecca, and Jamie.
I wasn't positive that we had decided that we were going to hire the food.
We didn't ever take a vote on it. You're right. We did not take a vote on it.
Probably why it
So
wasn't in the
that's-
budget.
What's that?
Probably why it was.
Which is why we never
We
really
never put it in the budget.
Uh-huh.
Those were the assumptions we made, you know, keep current staffing except for the ELL teacher, which we
Right.
had, which we are already gonna hire
We
regardless, because we have to.
we were trying to stay staffed, you know,
Neutral.
level staff. But it did come up, and some people got excited about that idea because it's the other half of what we're trying to do in food service. But, so I think the two things you've got to reach out. Go ahead.
It's Colleen. I think it might help to hear more about that position again, or, you know, what are some of the benefits, what our expectations would be of that role, and the things that that person would do. I don't know if that's something that you could speak to now, or if
Well, I
we
could
can
send
talk
out that
about it at
draft.
our meeting, our
We can
committee
talk
meeting.
about it certainly at the committee meeting, absolutely. But I think if you recall what we were talking about, and I can send the job description out again, because I think I did send it out right before that
No,
meeting.
we
but
talked about it. Yep.
We did, and it was really just looking at all of those, first of all, there was the wellness piece, right? You know, which is why we could talk about putting half in instruction and half in food service, because part of it was, you know, bringing, you know, fresh, you know, the fresh veggie of the month and all of the things that happen sometimes in some schools, not always in every school, but we wanted some equity around those kinds of instructional pieces, nutrition, wellness, taste testing, all of those pieces that we talked about for classroom work. Then there was another piece of it where, you know, I think Craig was excited because there are some things he wants to do programmatically. You know, feeding senior citizens, being able to do more community dinners, to make the cafeterias look more inviting, more like dining halls than institutions. So, so that part of it got Craig pretty, and some of that work with the state and some of the funding and grants that are available. So that was the stuff we talked about.
That's one of the things that I think would, I don't know, be on the list of value, is having somebody that can work through state grants and programs that are available for food. I think that's probably time consuming for someone who's also feeding everybody every day. It really takes some time.
So here's a blunt question. I apologize for my bluntness,
Be blunt.
but is the job description written by the person that you would intend to hire?
Well, well, first of all, we don't intend to, because we've talked about that too. It did tend to get wrapped around a person that helped us put a job description together, but I mean, what we certainly have talked about is if this position becomes a reality, it has to be advertised, it has to be posted in-house. We have to go through a pretty extensive interview process, hopefully with a couple of board members and administrators on board. So the person that did consult on putting that together, because that's part of her current job, didn't write it, but gave us like templates to work from. So yeah.
What do you mean templates to work from?
In other words, examples of other jobs like that in the state, right? With self-operation food service programs that have, sometimes they're called, like for example, there's one place where there's a food service director like Greg, then that person's got 3 assistants that, one handles program, one handles food, one handles finances. So there was sort of a pulling all that stuff together when we were looking at it. And right now, Craig and Rodney does the culinary work, but Craig and Rodney, because of the size of our district, we're just not big enough to have 2 or 3 assistants for Craig, but we're too small to have just 1 or 2. We're right in that middle ground pretty much. It's hard. But I think, again, they're doing a great job just the way they are, but it would just be value added, much like with the DEI piece that you mentioned, right? I mean, you can get it off the ground a certain way and then build it, or, yeah, it's hard. Making those decisions are hard, but I think it should be your decision.
Well, I mean, with the DEI piece, we, as a large group of people, are writing a job description for it, and I was concerned that there might be a conflict of interest.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. I think that night it might have felt a little bit like that, but that was not.
It did.
Yeah,
It definitely did.
I'm sure it did. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm sure it did.
So, sorry to be anal about that sort of thing, but.
No, that's okay. I get it.
But I am.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it sounds like people are in agreement that we go back to committee, right? That we're gonna look at 2 things, basically. Well, 3 things. The DEI position, right? 1. 2 would be the food program coordinator position. That's 2. And then the ADM versus equalized people split for those services or any other services at this point. Because I saw Anne Marie typed in a chat that she was saying that she thought, I can read it here. She says, Anne Marie said, I thought food service coordinator was going to be at least partly paid for by excess food service funds, which it is. So what you're seeing in here is just a projected, I think the food service can only be down because we're projecting a higher subsidy, right? Because that's the amount after all the revenues come in, right? And right now we've been blessed because we're not having to sell food. It's all universal, and we're billing by plate, right? So that program does generate a lot of funds, a lot of revenue. And then Anne Marie said, I disagree with Scott regarding ADM. I think it's fair not to include them. I assume we mean high school students for food service costs. I also think there may be some other services that should be done that way too, like transportation. And again, that would be opening up another whole can of worms, but it's something we can consider as we go into committee work, I think. But we've got to decide right now, the advantage to food service, why we can do food service different than all those other pieces, just mechanically, is that they are two separate funds. We have the general fund, which includes, you know, all those central office services, special education, business, transportation, but food service is an absolute separate fund. It's audited separately, it's tracked separately, it's budgeted separately, has its own revenue resources or sources.
And the difference is what you're assessed.
And the difference is what you're assessed, exactly. But I think we can go back and talk about this. I mean, Rebecca and Colleen and Jamie were hoping they were not done. It would have been a very boring 4 weeks.
And if you give me a fair amount of time on the front end, I could probably come up with a way
to compare it all.
To compare it all in one thing, so that they will be
perfect.
efficient with Rebecca and Jamie and Colleen's time.
And bring it back
I
that
think
way.
that's a good idea, Larry.
They just have to, then you just, like, I could give you option A, B, and C on one page.
Yes.
And then you guys just choose.
Yep.
I get, I hear what Scott's saying, and I understand how much the history behind the heavy lift that was to get to equalized pupil. At the same time, I do get the argument for ADM. So I can, you know, I think it's much harder to argue ADM for Katie Ahern, which is why we don't. It's much harder to argue ADM for David, which is why we don't, or Diane. Lori. Which is why we've always used equalized pupil. But food service is one thing where there's no Springfield High School students walking through that line. But I do think the one benefit of equalized pupil is it's all our kids, and I think that's important too. So it's a tough call. It's a call only the board can make.
And I'll be able to, Anne Marie, just, you know, I'll be able to speak a little bit more clearly about transportation. I just don't want to mislead people. I want to get the accurate information and then come forward, because I understand we don't transport high school kids to Woodstock, but I don't.
Transportation is in the general fund.
Yes, it's in the general fund, and I don't think our contract would. I think your contract is only for what it costs you at Weathersfield, and in other words, the contract's built on all three buildings and the kids they're transported. So I think it might be moved, but I don't want to say too much until I do the research, or we do the research on that, and then we'll come back on that one.
Hey, David.
Purple aid.
And that's also this category of aid tied to that too, right?
Yeah.
David.
Yes, Scott.
Yeah, is the ADM a 3-year average, like the equalized pupil number?
No,
ADM?
No, it's ADM is last year's students in the building. Equalized pupil is the rolling average.
Right. So I was just.
That's correct. That's correct.
I just wanted to bring that up because so there's more to the discussion, you know. So the equalized pupil as a mechanism in this respect, you know, has a really good.
It's an average.
It allows communities to know what's coming.
Yeah. So I think the benefit, I think what you're saying, Scott, of equalized pupil is that there are less peaks and valleys.
Yes.
Well, for example, Heartland and that difference only went up, and there's I mean, Christine can speak to it, and I can speak to it. If next year, if you did ADM for all your SU purchasing and did not no equalized pupil, just for a thought experiment, we know in the buildings right now today, which will be next year's ADM, Heartland, because we're reporting on it right now, is not 267. We know that. So if Mount Ascutney goes up a little bit, which they have, it would dwarf any of the gains that equalized people would show. So I think, again, if that's one of the drawbacks of ADM. The pro is that there's logic to the high school tuitioning piece. The con is that you could have much bigger dips and peaks and spikes with ADM. You have a lot less. Equalized pupil is much flatter. The most we got, for example, this year was less than 1% difference, if you think about it, which is pretty amazing among your three districts. Heartland went up last year relative to the other districts, less than 1%, and half the percentage went to Mount Ascutney, and half roughly went to Weathersfield because it has to go somewhere, and that's a benefit of equalized pupil. So, yeah, it's an important thing to think about, Scott. If you take the logic out of it, you could say there's a benefit
You
to stabilizing your
stabilize.
assessments.
Right. And to be honest with you, that's what we talked about when we discussed equalized pupil, was stabilizing the assessments. We didn't want big spikes one year and then big drops the next year.
Yeah.
Marie?
Yeah.
Anne Marie, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I didn't hear you call my name. I also wanted to ask about, so how does it work with the $1 million surplus that we have for the past fiscal year? Would that be, would that come into play at all with the future?
This current year.
Yeah.
That's the year, you mean the year we're in right now, Anne Marie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we just reported on that tonight, and yeah, it would impact that, because what we've done, at the end, if we have a surplus, we return money, or we credit you toward next year's assessment, and we do that by equalized pupil, right? Because that's how we at least up until this year with the ADM discussion, we've done it. But yes, you're right. It would impact next year's assessments
If it stays.
if it stays a surplus, correct?
Unlike your local district surpluses, which have to be voted on by the voters or board action, capital reserve.
You have to wait a year.
You have to wait a year
on
the local.
This you can use next year.
Right away.
Yeah.
And I think what Ed has done traditionally is credit you on your assessments for next year,
Yeah.
rather than just send money back. That doesn't make sense. And then the surplus shows up in your budget eventually.
When would we know how much that's going to actually be? Like, do we know that before town meeting or?
No, you'll have a better, each quarter you'll have a little bit better idea, but you probably won't know till after town meeting.
Yeah, close to June.
Yeah.
One thing I would say to the board members and to the principals who are watching this, I will share about the presentation. It's a Google slide. So as we make changes, it's not like a PDF, it's not static. So if after the committee meets, I may update some of these things, right? So just be aware that as you build out
You'll be able to see it.
presentations for town meeting, that you don't use old slides, just a heads up.
Great, thank you. It's after 9.
Yes, it is. I think Scott has one.
Scott has one more question.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say this before, but I didn't get. Anyways, I just didn't want to leave Elizabeth hanging out to dry with the tough subject of conflict of interest with the work that we do and all of us board members do. And the truth is that I had similar concerns when the food service coordinator job was spoken. It was probably 2 months ago now. I'm not sure when it was. I'm kind of losing track of that, but so I just wanted to make sure that David and the other board members knew that it was not just one board member that was concerned about that. And it's always something that we all have to keep in mind. And yeah, I don't know what else I can say, but thank you for bringing that up, Elizabeth.
Yes, thank you, Scott, and thank you, Elizabeth, because,
Sure thing.
yes, that was a concern. So, let's see, so there is the tuition policy, the second reading, adoption. Let me
I
see.
think that was in your packet.
Yes, it was.
Bye, Angie.
Bye, Angie, thank you.
Yeah, Angie.
Does anyone have any questions on the tuition policy?
Yeah, the first line, it says the towns of the Windsor Southeast District, and shouldn't that be the districts?
The districts, yes.
At the next sentence, it refers to the districts that pay tuition.
Yeah, so let me pull it up, so, hold on.
I
think it's,
I asked for it to be towns because we're still paying for Western students to.
Oh,
The district, we're
What is
paying
a
it as a
district?
district.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
that's true, really,
Yeah.
right? Because you're not paying, yeah. So that could change to districts, right? I will change it right now.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Good point.
So I'll say the districts within the Windsor Southeast Supervisory Union. Does that sound right?
Correct.
Got it. And I'll put that in bold just so you can see the change. We did change the residency voucher. We talked about a couple of these things last time. Second reading tonight, right?
so Elizabeth, for those continuing payments from West Windsor, do those monies come only from West Windsor taxpayers?
They come from the district. Yep.
She
Amy's
slipped
right.
back, she slipped back into a form.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm tired, just like everybody else.
Yeah. And we can either adopt this tonight or we can move it to third reading if you want to. It's really up to you. I think it says what we wanted to say now, though, unless anybody else has anything they want to add. And then Katie just told me that the region, the policies that Amy was talking about is being discussed in the whole Southeast because they want to have one policy that kind of covers the whole Southeast, right? They're going to take that VSBA model and then apply it to, but we'll bring it back next time. We'll have that.
The policy you wanted to add at the.
Oh, yeah.
About
okay.
special education.
Right, okay.
No, this one, I think it's up to you, but it probably is ready.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions or concerns on this policy?
Do we still have a quorum?
Yes.
We should check that. I think we do.
Because, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
More than a quorum.
Yeah.
People
It's
sticking
only
right.
been staff that's left.
Right. And Nikki.
Mostly
Yeah,
staff.
Right.
Okay, so getting back. So if everyone is okay, so I had talked about the policy on special ed. And I sent the, kind of the skeletal policy from VSBA. So people could take a look at that and it will be on the agenda for November for the first reading. That will give us a chance to have our second reading and approval before the January 15th date. So moving forward, we will go to items for action. And the first item for action would be approval of the tuition policy. If people are ready, I will take a motion to approve that policy.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second.
So is that Mark? Okay, and Nancy was the motion. So any other questions? I will go through our roll call. And first, we have Anne Marie.
Aye.
Colleen Spence.
Aye.
Davis.
Aye.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
Jamie.
Aye.
Mark.
Aye.
Nancy.
Aye.
Rebecca,
Aye.
Scott,
Aye.
and I vote aye, which makes it, I think we're
Unanimous.
unanimous. So thank you, everyone. And I believe that was it for items for action.
That is it.
Okay, so, setting the next agenda, in my notes, there will be
The SU budget.
the SU budget, information on negotiations, the full ESSER budget report,
Correct.
and an update on the ESSER community forums. Perhaps more information on recovery plan. Well, yeah.
Yes, because that'll be part of the ESSER pretty much, the recovery plan. And then also I think Katie wants to do a sort of a summary of the budget, special education budget, including, the summer academy. We'll have some data on the summer academy by then too.
Okay. And there will be an update on the anti-racism social justice work. And I think that will be a full meeting.
In the policies, or the
And that one.
Policy, yeah.
And I don't know if you want to list this separate, Amy, but Brittany did mention that wanting to bring back the testing data coming next month.
That'll be part of that, yeah, right, that recovery plan, including, when I say academy data, I know that one of the things that they are doing is that they're tracking those summer academy kids to see whether or not their scores, whether or not it made a difference, essentially, right?
So, David, do you think we should have that separate, or do you think that would be a whole recovery plan, special ed?
I think it'll all come under that one category,
Okay.
basically, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Wendy, for bringing that up and making that clarification. That will be a full meeting. Plenty of discussion. So do we need, will we need executive session?
No, tonight?
Correct.
No.
No, okay.
We don't need to follow up with the thing that you talked about the last time?
No, not right now. It looks like we're making progress.
Okay, so I want to thank everyone for all of the rich discussion that we had, budget and equity and the anti-racism work that we're all doing in our communities. And I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
That was Elizabeth. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
That was for. Okay, I'm gonna go through the roll call because it's just so much fun. Anne Marie, are you ready to go home? Or to
Yes.
stay? Colleen, Spence.
Me too.
Okay, David.
Aye.
Elizabeth, ready to go home?
I am. Aye.
Okay. Jamie.
Aye.
Mark.
Aye.
Nancy.
Yeah, we're almost.
Good night. Hi.
Hey.
Tucking them in.
Rebecca.
Tucking them in.
Yes.
Scott.
Yes, good night.
And I am ready to go home.
Yeah.
So thank you again.
Yes, and Rebecca, Colleen, and Jamie will be in touch. It'll probably be a week from this Friday, so hang tough.
Sounds good.
Just what you
wanted.
And everyone, at our next meeting, You are also going to be charged with letting us know what the main dish for your Thanksgiving meal is going to be.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's how we'll start.
Okay. So have a wonderful month. Happy Halloween. Take care, stay well, and we will all be in touch. Good night.